And I am Thomas Didouy. I am going to be moderating this discussion. I'm the policy officer at the European Youth Forum in charge of fiscal policy and economic governance issues. The Youth Forum, for those who do not know us yet, is the democratic platform of youth organizations in Europe, representing millions of young people all across the European Union and the rest of the continent. We are happy today to be publishing a report called Generation Austerity, which is a collection of testimonies of people who were young during the austerity years in Spain in the beginning of the 2010s. I'm going to put a link to the report in the chat. And these voices, these stories were organized in themes that range from housing to employment, but also gender and care work, personal debt, life expectations, health, mental health, and mobilization. The report is beautifully illustrated by Marta Cartu, and it's a very good read. I hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed writing it. And you can get a preview of the stories by following us and watching the videos that we are posting on our different social media from, of course, well, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and the rest. You know what social media is. I'll just put a link to a tweet that we published on Twitter. And so you can have an idea of what these videos look like. I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists very soon. I just want to say a word on our gender balance. It's been difficult, to say the least, to get a gender balanced panel, and we have failed this time. I'm sorry about that, and it's a problem that we often see on these topics of macroeconomics, and we're doing our best to for this not to happen again. That being said, we are very happy to have with us Maria Rodriguez Alcázar, who is a board member of the European Youth Forum and works specifically on socioeconomic inclusion, as well as Giuseppe Porcaro, who was Secretary General of the European Youth Forum in the years we're going to be talking about, and who is now, correct me if I'm wrong, head of outreach at the think tank Bruegel. We are also happy to have Raresh Voisu, who is a board member of the Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions, OBESU, and Edu Arechaga, who is head of international affairs at the Youth Council of Spain. I see that Francisco, you have arrived as well, so welcome Francisco Fernandez Trujillo Moares, who is a co-author of the report. Now, just before we get into it, please everybody be respectful of our time constraints. We are going to do our best to stick to 1 hour here. So with no further ado, let's go. The first question I wanted to ask our panel, and maybe Edu, you can tell us something about this, is what austerity is and how it was implemented in Spain, before we can have a talk about how it impacts young people specifically. Edu, the floor is yours, and you have a bit less than 5 minutes. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Thomas. Hi, everyone. So I'll go through this question, and for sure, I cannot do anything else but to quote the amazing report you've done to define what austerity is, because my words would not be enough. There it says that austerity is a set of fiscal measures aiming to reduce the public deficit, mostly through cuts in government spendings. And we are making this in the context of this Great Recession and these European debt crisis that began in 2008. And it's also important to mention that all these austerity measures were also something that the European institutions were giving a lot of pressure to the European Union countries to implement, because, as you know, the situation was really complex. But going after that definition, then what happened, especially, or as I can talk about, which is Spain, was that the government started just to cut mainly rights of the people. We are talking about, as the report again really well illustrates, they are cutting healthcare, education, housing, employment, culture, many things. So there we see that these kind of measures were like making a great impact on the Spanish society, and for sure the European one, but as we are talking about Spain, and mainly for the groups that were most vulnerable, for sure, which one of them it's always, and let's hope one day it won't be, young people. So as this, we saw that many measures were implemented. One of the biggest ones were, for example, cuts in education. We saw that the classes were like the groups were getting bigger, so the ratio was getting also bigger. The cost of education was getting much higher, less teachers, and a lot of things that in the end were just making education, the education quality getting like lower and lower and lower. Also, when we were talking about employment, that went really crazy, and I for sure have many anecdotes I can share, but it's been really really hard for young people in those times, and it's still having many consequences up to the day, because the employment got really precarious, and then the situations were really bad. We were seeing that there was like this extremely high non-volunteer temporality rate in contracts. Something kind of interesting of that time was that we were having contracts of a day or even hours. I can remember many friends just going to these companies and waiting if they were going to get a contract that day or not, which for sure is extremely complex when you're trying to build a life project. And that also impacts on emancipation. In the Youth Council of Spain, we are very aware of emancipation problems, as we are editing every semester this Youth Emancipation Observatory, where we analyze all this data, and we are seeing that before everything started with this crisis, we had like these almost 27 emancipation rate, which means that people under 30 were able to leave their parents' house. And after that, like up to the current day, we just have like a 13-14%. So we've seen that decrease, that shrink of our civil rights, of our capacity to be able to have like autonomous life projects. So that's something that we're really bad. Also, something I wanted to share, and I think it's extremely relevant for the Youth Forum context, is that all these measures were also impacting, again, what we called youth poverty, and is something the Youth Forum works on really well. 1 out of 3 young people were in risk of youth poverty when the COVID crisis exploded. And just to finish, I also wanted to say, I'm just talking so much, I want to say so many things, that these cuts were not just impacting general stuff like employment or healthcare, they were directly an excuse to shrink the ever-shrinking civic space we have. They were closing youth councils, for example. Ours got closed. The one in Madrid got closed, many of them. Also, other ones got their budgets like really, they were having these really big cuts in their budgets and capacities. We were seeing that, for example, the budget the government has for youth organizations participation, it's been frozen since 2012. Like all of this has made a big impact in youth organizations, and we always see that it's really hard for us to have this position where we can impact and do our work. And if we get these big cuts and we get destroyed, and then we use this kind of context and economical circumstances as an excuse for the governments again to make us like little, then it takes a long time for us to recover back to the previous situation. So I think this is something we should really take into consideration. And also never forget for when some other crisis, as the one that's that maybe that we're in right now is about to start because of the COVID situation, it's going to happen. We can never let institutions shrink our civic space again. And I think that's it for the time.
Thanks a lot, Edu. And in fact, we see a lot of what you've been describing in the report. Um, Giuseppe, you were Secretary General of the Youth Forum at the time. Can you tell us a bit how your experience shows what disproportionate impact or specific impact austerity measures and these government budget cuts have on youth and young people specifically?
Thank you, Thomas. Very. First of all, I also want to appreciate the report that you just published and the value that it has in terms of not only looking retrospectively about what had been going on basically 10 years or even more than 10 years ago, but looking at what kind of impact it has on the current generation today. So that's definitely a very valuable contribution that you're doing. Obviously, I can recall the crisis as it was being unfolded. I was the Secretary General of the European Youth from 2009 to 2014. But I was already working for the European Youth Forum and as a volunteer member of a member organization of the European Youth Forum since before. So I've seen the whole 2000s in the youth field, and I really saw a switch in the priorities and in the advocacy efforts that we were putting from, let's say, the beginning of the 2000s, and then from 2007, 8, when the crisis started, to face what was going on. And at the beginning, we were not really, I mean, the beginning of the crisis, so if you think about 2007, 2008, it wasn't really clear immediately about what was going to be the impact. It was only a little bit later in 2009, 2010, that things started to get a bit more crystallized, especially here in Europe. The first impact of the crisis was, of course, a global financial crisis. We were obviously tackling it at the European Youth Forum in the frame of our global work as well, and how this would have impacted back to Europe. We had the basis, which, you know, a basis of the European Youth Forum work on social affairs, on employment, of course, issues related to youth unemployment and you know, precarious situation of young workers have been already there. So it wasn't something that the European Youth Forum all of a sudden had to start in a vacuum. So we had, but for example, if I was looking, because of your invitation, I was looking back to the kind of documents we were producing back then. The first big policy papers that we had on youth employment back in 2008, of course, had an overall dimension over there, but there wasn't yet this very crisis situation. Why? Then you go on 2009, where we really had to act because of the crisis. So this was a little bit of a shock and understanding what to do at the beginning. And the way we were reacting, there were, I think, that three or four axes, which were the main things that then got, I think they got really in the backbone of the work that the Youth Forum could do to contribute for that. The first one was the more, let's say, general reflection about the social integration of young people, the people in need, not in education, training, or work, which was a concept that was present, but that really became known and you know, unfolded during the crisis. So the need to tackle the need problem was at the core. How to tackle the need, what the Youth Forum could do on that? Well, first of all, the expertise and the kind of support that the youth organization could have brought. So the more positive, proactive approach to that was saying, we as European youth organizations and in general young people, we can be part of the solution because we can train young people on having the right kind of skills that are needed. So the whole issue around skills, which has been something that the European Youth Forum have been working on since its onset, because the importance of non-formal education in youth organizations has been always like the core business of what we were doing. So how we can bring the core business of what we do to this problem. So issues of the skills and how the youth organization could have been part of the solution because of all the issues that were mentioned before about the risk on the funding side. So we had to show that we had a proactive role to play. But then there was the more, let's say, activist part, the denouncing part, you know, like being the youth rights organization. And on that, we had two main levels. One was to advocate for a youth guarantee. So that was really tackling also the problem of the needs and saying the position back then was, if someone, a young person, is not in a education or a training or in a job for more than 4 months, the government should step in and should help. This famous concept of the youth guarantee. And this one was quite successful, at least in terms of advocacy, because the European Union got on board, the governments got on board, but then of course with many other issues along the line during the 2010s about the implementation of such youth guarantee. Yeah? But I'm just saying like the big blocks. So skills, youth guarantee. And then there was the other action that we took, which was internships, because we wanted to tackle the problem of precariousness and build alliances with the social partners, with other actors. And internships, there was a vacuum. There was a vacuum. You also need to understand that the European Youth Forum and the organization of the Youth Forum were stepping into a territory in terms of political advocacy, which traditionally was not occupied by youth organizations, but was occupied by social partners. So you had to all of a sudden build bridges with the trade unions and the Association of Entrepreneurs, and you name it, but in a way that would have been possible to enter into this space without all of a sudden duplicate the things. And internships was very instrumental. Besides being a great initiative itself, it led to the charter on quality internships, and then more recently, something that has been going on for 10 years, the recent legal action as well by the European Youth Forum in order to say that unpaid internships are not legal. But all this has all this story behind, and I think these three axes were very influential. Then there was a last part which was transversal, and I'm going to finish, which was the more political action. So there was the budget negotiations, especially more into the Euro crisis, like from the financial crisis to the Euro crisis, 2011, 2015. The MFF, there was the big negotiations for the multi-annual financial framework of the European Union. And obviously we had to push forward about getting more money for youth. And so this was a big topic of conversation over there. And then there was the political, more high fly political action, because all of a sudden in 2012-13, it became clear for the leaders, so at the heads of state level, that something should have done. And that's where we really stepped on. Like there was the French presidency of the EU, President Hollande. There was really a coordination, also in close cooperation with the national youth councils of Germany, Italy, France, and Spain, especially. We created some sort of coalition, national level, European level, and we managed to get a youth component into a special summit of heads of state for youth employment. And that's, like, say, the more like visibility part. So as you can see, the way we did it, it was to trying to combine the strengths that we had, stepping into new territories and trying to push the agenda forward. So yeah, that's in a nutshell a bit the story of what was going on back then.
Thanks a lot, Giuseppe. It's really useful to have the history behind all this. And yes, the Youth Forum is still working on the internships situation, and is actually right now working on a campaign called to ban unpaid internships in Europe, and called "Can You Afford to Work for Free?" You can find all that on our website. It's really interesting to hear you talk about well, both the solutions like the youth guarantee, but also the fact that there was at first there was a shock in the beginning, and I think that's why we're doing it. We're publishing this report now. It's because we do not want to be surprised again, and we want to prepare in case this happens again. And actually, that brings me to our next discussion, which is why this report now? Why was it needed? What's in it? And what kind of new risks are we facing? And I'm going to pass the floor to first Francisco and then Maria with 5 minutes each or a bit more if needed. Francisco, you're a co-author of the report. You did the field work, organized all these voices around themes. Can you tell us about your approach and how you wrote this and what's in the report?
Well, thank you. First of all, we would like to thank to European Youth Forum for allowing us to present our work, and especially to Thomas, with whom we have worked closely, and it has been a pleasure. But we will also like to thank to European Youth Forum for being able to tell the stories of a generation, which is also our generation. When we started planning the project, we realized that we were at the right time to address our generation's relationship with austerity policies. We have suffered the consequences and the impact of this in our life trajectories. This makes us particularly vulnerable to the possibility of the repetition. 14 years after the 2008 crisis, we wanted to tell through the voices of those who suffered from these measures the stories of austerity. This idea of retrospective and the experiences of the crisis after a decade responds to the uncertainty of the threat posed by a new wave of cuts and austerity policies in the face of an economic crisis of the COVID pandemic. Remembering and recovering these stories through concrete experience help us to see what these policies entailed and invites us not to repeat the mistakes that caused suffering, fear, and uncertainty for the population. Well, I'm going to talk about our work, our team. Our team is composed of 4 members from different professional backgrounds. Pablo and me, we are sociologists and social science analysts. Marta is illustrator, and Nacho is graphic designer. We have tried to find synergies to enhance the depth of what we wanted to tell through cooperative and collaborative work. Our approach consisted of getting close to the realities in order to know, interpret, and understand what the consequences of austerity were for people and how they were perceived. We worked with in-depth interviews using qualitative methodology practices in sociology. We wanted to emphasize the biographical element for the interviewees themselves to give voice to their own life stories. Well, our interviews have been open-ended. The topics covered were the result of the species of the interviewees. The concept of voices that you can see in the report we use is based on the idea of retrospective. We use these voices that have told us about their past experiences in order to approach the story of a generation. Although these stories are of a specific people at specific moments in their life, but they are also the shared stories of a generation. Once the research phase was completed, we made a narrative that included a graphic representation as the main axis of the story about austerity. The narrative has three interrelated parts. The writing test that gives a structure to the narrative. We combined literal statements of the interviewees with the analysis and description of the phenomenon of austerity. The illustrated part that represents through his own language a visual account of the research. And the layout and graphic design accompany the narrative to express the general thrust of the approach. Well, in the report, we have discussed the impact of austerity policies on the lives and the life trajectories of young people along different thematic axes. The report is divided into different themes. These are the result of the issues that were identified as central by interviewees. Some of them come as a surprise to us because in our previous analysis we didn't imagine that they will be so important. This is the case of mental health, indebtedness, or care, for example. As you can see in the report, the issues that we have worked with are work, education, housing, health, and mental health, cares, debt, migration, and mobilization. I just want to comment about the issues or the thematic axis on the importance of mobilization for the interviewees. Mobilization such as the 15M, feminist mobilization, or social movement in housing in Spain, went for the interviewees an opportunity to comfort the reality of the crisis, cuts, and austerity. This was a space from which to feel that they have regained control of their lives, and especially to lose their fear. Overall, we have tried to address how austerity policies hit the life trajectories of young people in many ways, turning those who lived through these tense years into a generation in crisis. The present is a new scenario in the form of a challenge for society as a whole, for politics and institutions. And only to end, I would like to thank those who have participated in this report by sharing their own life stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francisco. And yes, thank you very much for all the work that's been done by you and your team for this report, both the field work, the writing, the editing, the illustrating, the design. It's a beautiful piece of work. And I think that, as you said, all these parts, whether they are illustrations or text, combine to bring a very powerful message. So thank you very much. Maria, I'm going to turn to you now, because can you tell us why this report was needed now, what kind of new risks we are facing, and why it's important to be talking about austerity today in 2022?
Yes, thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Francisco, and all your team for this report that we are presenting now. you asked me which are the risks that we are facing right now. We need to acknowledge that the young generations and the ones to come are the one facing a triple crisis. So first, an economic crisis that started unfolding in 2008, then a socioeconomic crisis that is the result of the pandemic and what the pandemic brought about. But then also we are facing the climate crisis that is only beginning, and we need to acknowledge this. So these three crises are impacting young people disproportionately, and also the generations that are to come. We are actually the least responsible for them. The current pandemic has led European countries to create unprecedented amounts of public debt, which is not necessarily bad because it was to deal with this crisis. But this brings us the risk that new austerity measures may be back in the agenda. And this is directly linked with the Stability and Growth Pact of the European Union. So indeed, right now, the rules that are constraining government spending were deactivated in 2020 by using this general escape clause, and they will stay deactivated until 2023. However, the problem that we are facing right now, or the risk, is if those clauses are not reformed in the meantime, this will lead to the same self-imposed economic and social consequences as in the 2010s. Because we are seeing right now that the government debt regarding the gross domestic product in the Eurozone is about 98%, which is well above the 60% that the rules say. So this is the first thing, the first risk that we are seeing with the public debt that is on the rise. But secondly, in this context of inflation, with everyday prices that are going up and wages that are not always following, we are facing also a rampant cost of living crisis. And this situation is already worrying, but we are also worried because of this announcement of the European Central Bank that the interest rates will raise in July and September. And even if we don't take position in monetary policy, what we know already is that when the ECB hikes the interest rates, it mechanically makes the public debt in Mediterranean countries more expensive. Italy, for example, right now is at risk of speculative attacks similar to those that we saw in Greece or in Spain that led to austerity policies. So we seem to have right now all the ingredients to this sovereign debt crisis: inflation, higher interest rates, raising public debt, and all the rules and regulations of the Stability and Growth Pact that are still in place. So by strongly constraining the ability of the governments to use fiscal policy to counterbalance the economic trend, the Stability and Growth Pact, this framework it's making a major contribution to raising inequality in Europe. So what we are fearing right now is that this bonus that is usually given to the past wealth will hamper the ability of young people to provide for themselves, from ourselves, and in the future as well. And what we fear as well is that this will be a strong driver for intergenerational inequality in the upcoming years. So this is the main reason why we are talking about austerity measures right now. And what we know as well is that under the current rules, public spending in climate action can mean that other investment have to be cut in areas as social affairs, education, well-being, or health. And this will create trade-offs and for sure will be in detrimental of building a well-being economy. So that's exactly the reason why we are talking about austerity at this moment.
Thank you very much, Maria, and in expressing both the concerns that the European Youth Forum has, and also explaining what the European rules and regulations look like bundled under this Stability and Growth Pact name. Now, we've talked about what austerity is and how it impacts young people, why there's a risk that it may be coming back now, and what we put in the report in order to get this discussion going. But I'd really like to know in this second part of our discussion how both the Youth Forum and its member organization, how they fought austerity 10 years ago. I think Giuseppe, you gave us quite a good explanation earlier. So I'll be happy to pass the floor to Radesh from Obesu. But if you want to add to what Radesh says, Giuseppe, do make me a sign. Radesh, if you can tell us what Obesu did at the time, and maybe if we can draw a couple of lessons from that time, it would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. So it was quite a sort of a trip with a time machine to go back to the 2010s. But what we did back then, right after we were bouncing back from the economic crisis, is that our member organizations at the moment, especially those in Southern Europe, in Italy, we've had some very prominent student movements. And so our member organizations, apart from the usual day-to-day business, they built some very complex student movements. They took the streets, they occupied different spaces, they did what they had to do to, first of all, put the topic of austerity and education on the public agenda, and then make sure that it stayed there and that it is properly addressed, both by the authorities with competencies on the topic, but also by the general public, because at some point we sort of slide into complacency and we see austerity as not being that big of a deal anymore. And our member organizations, what they did back in 2010 is that they managed to keep the topic on the agenda at a national level. And they had very, very clear asks and requirements from governments in what concerns education. So their message was very straightforward and unequivocal. It was no austerity cuts in the field of education. And then at a European level, Obesu, what we did was we worked with other European organizations at the moment and with other networks as well, to ask for a minimum percentage of the GNP to be allocated for education. That percentage at the time was 6%, if I'm not mistaken, to have that percentage guaranteed from all the member states of the EU, to sort of try to harmonize this public spending in the field of education and try to prevent huge gaps due to austerity measures. And our membership at the moment, again, we drawing from their national experiences and from their mobilization and from their policy dialogues which they had with the national authorities and the national governments, they adopted a resolution in which they laid out a couple of points, a couple of measures and a couple of proposals, which they then pursued in the following months and years. Topics such as abolishing all fees linked to education and training. So making sure that education, first of all, of course, is properly funded, but is also free as a fundamental human right. They at a European level, there was this proposal for the EU to promote through its framework a harmonization of the allocation of the GNP for education, again at that 6% level, and then to also make sure that both at the moment and sort of bouncing back from that period of austerity and economic crisis, the establishment of consistent, coherent, and reliable student welfare systems, because not only did the crisis destroy everything of what was left or what existed at the moment in terms of student welfare, but the issue was that there wasn't much to destroy. So, of course, if we would have had reliable student welfare systems, austerity, of course, would have affected students and school students, but they would have had a support mechanism to back them up. This didn't happen. And I think that's one of the main lessons that we can learn. And this, I'm going to conclude with this. And the main lesson that we can learn from this is that, of course, our society goes through deep economic changes almost on a monthly basis. We see changes in the markets and everything of the sort, and this affects in turn national governments and the way in which they spend money, the way in which they invest money. But having social welfare systems and having this sort of support system for students makes sure that sometimes what can be the most disadvantaged categories in society, young people who are unemployed or who are still in education, have a support mechanism to fall back into should they need it, or should they be the target of austerity measures. But of course, that's what we're fighting against. But yes, that would be the main lessons to be drawn from this.
Thank you very much, Raresh. It's really great that you finished with this point that with a proper safety net, with proper preparation, actually, we can approach these times of very recurrent economic crisis with more safety and with less disproportionate impact on young people, because I think it would be a right time to start thinking about what we are doing now to fight what may come, and to prepare for a possible downturn. I think we could have you, Maria, on what we're doing at the youth forum on both the rules and regulation, but also you, Edu, on as a board member of the Youth Council of Spain, to tell us what CJE is planning on doing as well. Maria, do you want to start on the youth forum, and then we'll move to member organizations?
Yeah, sure. Sure. Actually, what we are doing from the European Youth Forum, well, this is clear a priority for us. It's defined from our member organizations in our strategic plan from 2020 and 2023. We have the mandate then to work on sustainable development, on social rights, on a just transition to a carbon neutral economic system. So this fits perfectly with the mission to improve the quality of life of young people in Europe. And also, in order to work on all these efforts and all these topics, we for sure need an improvement in not only the quantity, but also the quality of the public funding. We are seeing right now that we are in the greatest health, social, and economic shock of our lifetimes. And we need this improvement in the public investment. What we are doing right now to work on these topics is in 3 different angles. So first on advocacy, second on capacity building with our members, and then on awareness raising. More focus on advocacy. We need to ensure that the economic governance framework, and that I was talking before, has been revised, and this general, has been revised before the general escape clause is deactivated. This is crucial for the years to come. We need to replace the Stability and Growth Pact with a Sustainability and Well-being Pact that is more focused on the well-being of people, but also on how sustainable this can be for the planet. So thinking more on the green as well. And therefore, we are advocating with European institutions on including in this pact as well an excessive emissions procedure that can tackle those member states that are diverging from their Paris Agreement's paths. So this is for us crucial, and this is how we are focusing our advocacy with EU institutions. And I must say that we are having positive developments on this field. So we are quite happy on how this is working. But furthermore, we are also advocating to replace these debt reduction pathways with green and social investment pathways that force member states to invest more in the just transition according to a newly developed green economy, as I was mentioning before. And therefore, this will also required replacing the headlines, debt and deficit ceilings with more flexible fiscal standards that can allow member states also to allocate money for this well-being economy. Regarding the capacity building, for this we are working on our members also for them to be able to replicate this work and work in their member states or across Europe on these topics. So for that we started in September some webinars on this. The first one was on the basis of fiscal policy, because not all of us, we are experts in economics. So first one was about the basics in fiscal policy, then the links on climate crisis, and the third one was on how to advocate for fiscal policy. This is crucial for youth organizations to keep on building our capacities, especially on advocacy. And the third angle in which we are seeing this topic is raising awareness of the general public. We are publishing now and these days this report that aims to contribute to this awareness raising, but also we are launching some campaigns, online communication campaigns, highlighting especially the links between the environmental topics and the social justice, and how fiscal policy can play a role in this. We are even talking in TikTok about economics. So this is an exciting journey that we are tackling. And actually it's Thomas from the Secretariat of the European Youth Forum who is leading our work on this topic. So thank you, Thomas, as well for your work on this.
Well, thanks, Maria. And I'm going to pass the floor, but just wanted to say these capacity building webinars that we did last year, we are going to do them again next year. So stay tuned for that. And whether you want to join 1, 2, or 3 of them, or only the advocacy one, or it will be possible, and you'll have more information on that very soon. I wanted to pass you the floor, Edu, but I think Giuseppe wanted to react quickly to what Maria said. I'm also mindful of the time. We have 10 minutes left, so let's keep it as short as possible, please. But Giuseppe, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to have a quick reaction, but it was more about the overall presentation that Maria was doing about the current situation. First of all, it's quite impressive that the European Youth Forum is stepping in more fiscal policy area. My current job is at an economic think tank, which is Bruegel, so we'll say that fiscal policy is a little bit what we do on a daily basis. So that's very interesting to know that you're building expertise in that. Actually, I think that you should come to some of our discussions here at Bruegel at some point, first of all. But secondly, I would like just to pinpoint that these 10 years, I mean, we are not in a vacuum. These 10 years mean something when it comes to fiscal policies and when it comes to the risk of austerity. There's no we are not in 2012 or 13 or 14. There is no appetite for similar situations and similar policy situation that they used to be like 10 years ago, both because of public pressure, but also because it has been proven that some of these policies didn't really bring and brought growth. So I think that the situation is quite different, even though there are some elements of risks of the current circumstances which are there, but we are not in the same situation of 10 years ago. But also we are in a kind of more worse situation for many other things, and that there are other circumstances that needs to be considered. There is a war going on. There is a lot of what has been going on the climate side, which is also at stake now because of the energy crisis. So the package of the situation now, we can have lessons learned from the past, and that's very good. But also have in mind that the situation you're living in is equally shocking than the situation we were living in 2007, 2008. And perhaps even more shocking, I have to say, for a lot of levels. So keep this with, please keep this in consideration when you are doing the actions that you're doing at the moment. And it's good that you look at everything holistically. But yeah, that's just something I wanted to pinpoint over there.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Giuseppe. I think that makes a lot of sense. Edu, do you have at the National Youth Council of Spain any plans, any work on this topic that you are preparing or that you've done recently that you want to share with us?
Okay. Okay. As Maria covered a lot of what YFJ is doing, I was thinking of maybe giving a bit of a strategy of what we think we should work or we are working towards this topic, which is, of course, all in the context of advocacy, which is what we most do. And it would be these, like these 4 Bs, like being youth right holders, being part of the table, being reminders, and being youth cooperative. Like when we were talking about these austerity measures and the impact they had, we have to make sure that we are being youth right holders so that when it happens again, or if it happens again somehow, we are prevented from the consequences that might have. So we are talking about things such as these banning unpaid internships, which we are collaborating with Youth Forum, or our work with the Spanish government towards the loss of employment, of education, or the minimum salary that got high a little bit recently. Also, we've been working hard towards scholarships for the vocational system in Spain, and adding mental education into the equation when we are talking about public health, to make sure that when these kind of things happen, young people have the skills and the safe space to be able to tackle all that. And also for us, it's very important that all of these youth rights come together with climate rights and this ecological transition all the time, which also YFJ is doing a really great work in. And this has to be really important for us to be able to be strong enough to face the consequences of things that could happen. So we are working on that. The next one was being part of the table. I'll just go quickly towards it because it's something we always do. We have to make sure youth organizations and councils are always part of the table. So when these kind of fiscal policies being developed, we are in the table saying, okay, take care that this is going to impact young people, and we cannot make that happen because the impact would be terrific, especially if we're talking about youth poverty, for example. And also making youth organizations and councils stronger, which is something we are advocating really much, and saving and rescuing the youth councils and organizations that were destroyed during the crisis. So we are advocating for that, to make sure that youth people have their space, or we have their space. Just a quick more was to being reminders, like even if we are young people, we cannot forget these things. And this is why also this report is very important, because by knowing what happened in the past, we have the evidence to then work in the present and make sure that kind of things and that kind of protection won't happen again. So that's also very important. And the last one is being youth cooperative. Like we are all working a lot on strengthening our bonds within the national youth organizations and youth councils sphere, also with the European and international ones. And mainly we are doing this past year a great work on cooperating a lot more with the Global South, because we truly believe that Global South young people and youth organizations there, they have a lot of expertise and things to share that we can learn from. And by cooperating within each other, we can also share that experiences as well, good practices and ways to tackle this kind of fiscal policy consequences for young people.
Thank you so much, Edu. And it's really interesting to hear that you, like, we should be prepared. And what you described is very close to what Hararesh was advocating for. So maybe we did learn some lessons from last time. What you were saying on being at the table and being able to say this may have specific consequences on young people and should be considered as such, just brought to my mind that we are also advocating at the European Youth Forum for the creation and the use of a EU youth test that will help measure and understand if policies taken at EU level have specific impacts on young people. Before we close, and we're almost going to be on time, thank you very much. Radesh, do you want to tell us what Obisu is planning on doing? And very quickly, I'm sorry, and then I'll conclude. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I'll do my very best to keep it under 3 minutes. So yeah, I mean, as Edu said earlier, we all know that during the pandemic, civic spaces have shrunk dramatically, and that did not exclude, unfortunately, the student movement, the school students movement. And what we've noticed that within our membership, street movements have moved online, and in general, the student movement has moved from a very sort of reactive protest, mobilization-based approach to more dialogue-based approach with the stakeholders. But again, this is all happening in a shrinking civic space. So now we're exploring ways in which we can regain the strength of the school student movement and to rekindle our cooperation with other European organizations focusing on education, such as ESU, such as the Lifelong Learning Platform, and so on. And right now, we're working on the topic of educational financing pertaining to the NRPs, so the National Recovery and Resilience Plans, and working with our membership to make sure that at the national level they are involved in the process of implementing and monitoring the implementation of the NRPs, and that they do have a say in the way in which those grants and what is virtually one of the biggest investment packages of the EU in the last couple of years, they actually invested in student welfare, in infrastructure for education and in education in general. And another thing that we've noticed is that in general, within the youth movement, when focusing on financial or economic matters, we tend to do this in a very sort of technical way, which is oftentimes not necessarily accessible to our fellow young people who are not accustomed to the terminology. So this can lead to quite an exclusionary approach for a number of young people, and it prevents them from joining the narrative and joining the discussion and providing us with their feedback and their input. And I think that what this report does is it translates austerity, which is a very sort of alien term for maybe a lot of young people at times, and it translates it into very personal, very concrete experiences. So that's what we're trying to do at Obesu, working with NRRPs, working with RMOs to make sure that these grants and that money is well spent, whilst also trying to sort of not, I want to say humanize, but try to make the conversation about economy and about the fiscal future of Europe and of the member states more understandable and more accessible for everyone.
Thank you so much, Radesh, and thanks a lot to all our panelists. Mindful of the time, so we're going to have to close this discussion. The report is available online. We will soon have printed versions of it on recycled paper, of course. So stay tuned on our social media channels, as we will be publishing more of the videos that I shared at the beginning of this webinar. How to use this report is primarily by sending it and targeting other civil society organizations, youth organizations, and activists who want or need to know more about austerity, about economic policy, and about its impact on young people. You can also use it with an advocacy purpose as well when meeting policymakers, as it is such a good read. It can impact their thinking and help prevent the second wave we are so concerned about. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'll go for a last piece of housekeeping. For those of you who are members or staff members and who are going to come to the coordination meeting between the European Youth Forum and the member organizations, please leave this Zoom meeting and join the next one at 3:30 via the link you received when you registered. It's very important. I had to say that. Thank you so much, Maria, Edu, Giuseppe, Raresh, and also Francisco, who had to leave. And see you very soon. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks, bye.